Sitting on a beach surrounded by sand in the ocean is probably one of the best feelings in the world. Travelers from all over the world flock to coastlines every year to lie on beaches and cool off in the adjacent oceans. However, there is nothing worse than finding litter on the beach, especially cigarette butts. For years, people cleaning beaches have found cigarette butts were the most noticeable items picked up from most of the Florida coastline. As a result, the Florida legislature passed a bill that gave the municipalities the power to vote to enact their own local bans. Now, coastal municipalities are taking action along coastal Florida. We're going to talk about the significance of these bans in this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening in the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about cigarette butts, or the lack thereof on beaches. And this is an interesting kind of policy that's being put into place. One, because Florida is very into, from a political standpoint, is very into your own rights and do your own thing, and hopefully you just kind of take care of things and take care of your fellow citizens and you're just a good person. It doesn't always happen, as we've seen before, but I might be biased in that case. But Florida, from an environmental perspective, has beautiful scenery, beautiful plant life, beautiful oceans, ocean species, things like that. But their water quality is horrible. Their environmental policies haven't been great, and so their environment has suffered over that time. Anywhere from manatee health to water quality health, to flooding, to sea level rise, to coastal development, marine pollution. So I was surprised to see I came across an article where they discussed a ban on beaches. Actually, it's from the Ocean Conservancy. Cool little organization. It's not little by any means. I'm being sarcastic, of course. But they came out with an article on how they had this smoking ban, and they actually came up with these little statues to promote the smoking ban. And they had these statues of cigarette butts, these large things to remind people that smoking on the beaches and disposing of cigarette butts in the sand is not a good idea. And that is really interesting because a lot of people smoke, and it seems as though the way people get rid of their cigarette butts have changed over time. When I was a kid, smoking was everywhere. I come from a time where restaurants had a smoking section, and you would stay on the non-smoking section, especially the families sometimes, but we would stay in the non-smoking section, but we would be just adjacent to the smoking section. And if you know anything about cigarette smoke, it doesn't have a boundary. It doesn't adhere to imaginary boundaries, which was what restaurants had. And so we were always around smoke. My parents grew up in Quebec, and we used to go to the malls in Quebec. You would allow smoke, not in the stores, but you're allowed smoking in the mall itself, which again, that doesn't really make sense. But I remember that quite vividly. But with that said, there was always a place to dispose of cigarettes. If you smoked in the car, there were ashtrays. If you smoked in a mall, there were ashtrays, which I find ironically that the ashtrays for cigarette butts had sand in them. You would butt it out in the sand, which is kind of ironic considering the topic that we're talking about today. But you would be able to dispose of it. There was always a place where you'd be able to dispose of it. Then they came out with the laws of banning cigarettes. And with that came with lack of disposal of cigarettes other than being outside. Nowadays, here in Canada anyways, in Ontario, if you want to smoke near a building or you want to go outside to smoke, you have to be 25 feet away from that building. Now, there's some leeway in that, but usually smokers adhere to that and they get away from the entrances. It's not just the building, but the entrances or exits. And so there aren't as many cigarette butts or places to put out your cigarette butts. In cars, in Canada, you're not actually allowed to smoke in cars if you have a kid that's under 12 years of age. So all of a sudden I've noticed there aren't any ashtrays in cars anymore. If you look at any newer cars, there aren't any ashtrays in there, and that used to be prevalent when I was a kid. So there aren't many places to butt out your cigarettes. So I see cigarette butts everywhere. I get people who come to my house to work on my house, and I see cigarette butts at the end of the driveway. I see people who come over who are smokers, and they smoke outside, and that's fine, no problem. I see cigarette butts like on my driveway. How is this happening? How is it that all of a sudden smokers feel the need that it's okay to just dispose of their cigarette butts wherever they would like, which is usually on the ground, on other people's property? The one thing that really gets me while driving is if I'm driving on the highway or driving on like a road, any kind of road, and you see that person in winter put down their window and then flick a cigarette butt outside. And you can really see it at night because obviously it's glowing, and when it hits the ground, it kind of, you see sort of the ash and the sparks and everything, or the redness of the end of the butt, the lit end of the butt. It drives me nuts because like, just keep it in your car. Like, you're smoking in your car. You can, handle the cigarette smoke. Just put it in, bring an ashtray in there, or put it in there so that you can just put it out when you get out of the car. I don't understand that. Anyway, rant over. The reason I'm saying this is because why I went on that rant is because there aren't many places to butt out cigarettes. So if you're on a beach and you're lying on a beach, right, and you're relaxing and you're a smoker, you're going to have a cigarette or two, right? You're going to want to have a cigarette or two because you're relaxing. Maybe you have a drink in one hand, whether it be alcoholic or non-alcoholic, and you're lying down in your chair and you got your umbrella and everything to keep, protected from the sun, but you smoke a cigarette. And what are you going to do? You don't want to get up and go all the way to the garbage in the back, right? Or by the cars, or by the parking lot, or by the trails. You're just going to put it out in the sand because, hey, it's sand. That's where we used to put out cigarette butts, in the ashtrays, because they were made of sand. And of course, you can probably cover up and nobody will probably see it until, wind kind of moves the sand around, or a storm moves the sand around, then all these cigarette butts get put back into the ocean, or some seagull comes by and eats a cigarette butt, right? Or a bird of some sort. And that's where we're at with this story is, Florida said, hey, you know what? We do not want this. We don't want cigarette butts all over the place. And the reason why they decided cigarette butts was because there were beach cleanups all along the shores. And what did they find the most? They found cigarette butts. Probably found plastic straws, maybe cutlery, plastic sarge, probably some water bottles, some bottle caps of those water bottles. But cigarette butts were prevalent in every beach. So the legislature got together and, like, from the state perspective, and said, you know what, we're going to give it the option to the municipalities to put in their own ban. And so now, I'm not sure if you can't smoke on the beach, but you definitely can't butt out on the beach. Meaning you can't leave your butts on the beach, which makes sense. It's an easy rule to do. But it never would have happened if beach cleanups didn't exist. If beach cleanups weren't done on a daily basis. And that's the advantage of doing a beach cleanup. And I've criticized beach cleanups before, being like, oh, everybody does a beach cleanup and they think they've done their job. And I've been wrong for that. Because if you do a beach cleanup properly and start measuring and start observing and measuring and logging the amount of items and which items you're taking in, right? You're cleaning up. Not only are you cleaning up the beaches, but you're actually logging and being able to drive policy, in like such as this case, to be able to say, hey, you know what? We have a lot of cigarette butts that we're picking up. Maybe we shouldn't allow that to happen. Boom. It goes into the legislature. Is it that easy? No, not at all. But when you get organizations like the Ocean Conservancy and their partners to take action, well, now you're talking. Now you're in trouble because they're relentless in a good way, and they have great connections with, not only the state of Florida's legislature, I'm sure, but a lot of different lawmakers in the United States and abroad. So, it's good to have them in your corner. It's good to join a beach cleanup. It's good to participate in these types of cleanups, because the overall goal is to, not only clean those beaches and prevent stuff from going into the ocean, but also from protecting and driving policy in the future to ensure that you're not picking up the same stuff over and over again. Now, does this mean that there'll never be a cigarette butt in Florida's coastline or on the beaches? Absolutely not. But there'll probably be less, especially if they start enforcing it. And if you get organizations like Ocean Conservancy to go on the beach and put up these statues of cigarette butts, which they're kind of ugly, but they're kind of cool at the same time, because they're ugly because they're a cigarette butt, but they're kind of cool because they're pretty big. They're probably about 1.5 feet in length, right? And so they're very noticeable. They come in all different shapes and stuff. And so when you see them on the beach, it's kind of a reminder, being like, hey, you know what? We're not allowed to do this, you know? And so I think that's a great incentive, and it's a great way to make sure that people who smoke are not putting out their butts in the sand. Now, what I would love to see, not only, I mean, other than not smoking at all, but what I'd love to see is portable ashtrays, so that people can, you know, butt out and then bring them back home or something like that. I would love to see that type of product, because, you know, we need these butts off the coastline. We need it off our beaches. We need it out of our wetlands and out of our oceans and out of our salt marshes and everywhere. So if you smoke, quit, please, because, you know, it's not only bad for the environment, but it's bad for you. I know it's not easy to quit, but that's my plea. But also, you know, there's a ban in Florida, all the way from Sarasota all the way down to Miami Beach. And the reason why they did is because they want to keep their beaches clean. They want to keep it away from having it full of cigarette butts. And you got to remember, the thing with cigarette butts is they're plastic fibers. They're like a conglomerate of plastic fibers. They don't break down easily. They're around for a while. They also still have toxic chemicals that are in the filters, that are in sort of the rest of the cigarette, of how much gets used. And that's not good for the environment. That's not good for the ocean. That's not good for the animals that end up eating them, like birds, maybe sea turtles or so forth. So just, you know, butt out. That's essentially what it is. It's just butt out. But you know, it's an interesting story that I want to share with you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this is something that they'll be able to do long term, and that is ban cigarettes? Do you think people should be allowed to smoke on beaches? Do you think it's something that needs to be cleaned up, and they should be charged to help support beach cleanups, because this is what's driving policy? I'd love to hear your thoughts on any and all those thoughts. Let me know by DMing me how to protect the ocean, or you can go to speakupforblue.com, click the contact us button, and email me. I would love to get back to you as soon as possible with my comments to your comments. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. I'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.